welcome to Dog Talk. I'm Dan Camilleri.
And I'm Laura McKillop. We'd like to start by thanking Enduro for their ongoing support in bringing you our fortnightly Q&A. Tonight, we are fortunate enough to be speaking with Dr. Ko from Dog Breeding Science.
Hey there.
G'day, Dr. Ko. How's it going?
Good. I know you guys want to hear a bit of stuff about testing working dogs.
Yes.
We do. I'm sure today was a busy day in the lab, doing a lot with dogs and horses.
Yeah. So exactly, we mostly test dogs and horses. I started off the lab as like a horse testing lab because I like horses, and basically there didn't seem to be many places that you could do DNA testing for horses in Australia, and I had the right skills to do it. So it just sort of has gone from there, from testing, horses and starting off with just a couple of horse tests to having nearly every test that you can do for horses we can do now. But of course, quite a few horse breeders are also dog breeders. And so they've been requesting, effectively that, can you do dog testing as well? And I'm like, well, I don't know as much about dogs, but yes, I guess so, theoretically at least, and then certainly when it comes to the working dog stuff, it was actually my old professor from university who got in touch and said, the University of Sydney team, along with the Working Kelpie Council, had been working on seeing if they could find, the genetics, that the mutations that are underlying CA in Kelpies. And they'd come up with a couple of things, but the university is not in a position to do like the actual testing, and I'm really not good at keeping track of samples coming in and results going out. And, they often have policy changes which make things like ownership of the information like difficult and stuff like that. So there was sort of like, my professor sort of came to me and said, hey, you do this already for horses, so can you do this for dogs as well? Yeah. And I was like, but there's been there has been strong demand for it. I know that it's still, for some breeders, like it's still something they're really not sure about or wouldn't do, but there's a lot of people that have jumped on it, and we don't really advertise. It's just, it's it has been like a thing that has continual strong interest since we started offering it.
Yeah. So just go back a step. For those that don't know, what is CA and how does it affect a dog? Can we go a bit more in depth in that?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So CA stands for cerebellar abioatrophy. It's my understanding as a geneticist, but not a vet, is that it's an issue with the sheath around the nerves, and it breaks down, and you don't have that insulation that helps the normal signal travel along the nerve the way that it should. It's primarily a brain thing, which is why it's cerebellar as opposed to being like a peripheral thing. But what you see is a loss of motor function. So first, for some dogs, it's they just don't seem to really know where their paws are. I think that that sense that's called proprioception, where you can tell where your limbs are, even when your eyes are shut, they lose that. And of course, they're not like the kind of animal that looks at their paws to see where they are. They just stumble around. They learn to compensate by picking up their legs really high or abnormally high. And they can have a tremor as well, particularly when they're excited or stressed out, scared. And so sometimes it can be really minor. It can just be they're a bit more clumsy than a normal working dog, or a little bit more high stepping than their litter mates, or have a head tremor when they're really focusing when they work. But it can go all the way to the point where a dog can't trot. They can walk, maybe. They can go upstairs, maybe, with help, but they can't even trot. So there's there's two types of CA that there may be more than two types of CA, but there's two types that we can test for. One of them shows up pretty early. So if your pups are if you have a litter of pups and they've reached 10 or 12 weeks old and there's just no sign, then it's not going to suddenly develop after that point for that type of CA. However, there's a second type which does not show up early. It shows up around 6 months of age instead, when people have started to put a bit of effort into training the dog, unfortunately. And at that point, the typical progression for dogs that end up with this later form of CA is that the owners tell me that they just started to not run so well. They'd bunny hop a little bit, move their back legs together rather than stretching out properly. But then it just kept getting worse. So then their back end is just going all over the place instead of sort of staying in line when they run, and they'll stumble or they'll push off so hard that they flip themselves over, they don't really know what the whole back half is doing. And at that point it becomes very clear that they're not going to be able to have a working career. So that's so that's the second form of CA. But both of them, it's really just this loss of motor function when the dog's quite young. So it's really typical that it would be, either right in puppyhood or just that 6 months of age, which, I've got a 5-month-old puppy now at the moment. I'd be a little bit horrified if she suddenly couldn't run around. But, if you've got a dog that's older, 2, and it's been fine, but then suddenly starts to show problems with its with its motor function, with its limbs, it may not be CA. It may be caused by something else instead. So CA is it's this loss of motor function, loss of coordination. I remember one owner from an overseas dog just said they included their dog in a batch of testing they sent me, not because they thought there was a problem with it, but just because they were curious and included it. And then I sent results back and they sort of said, and it was affected. And that's, they're tested as affected. And she said to me, I thought it was just an uncoordinated Kelpie. I'm wow. There's no thing as an uncoordinated Kelpie. Not normally. Anyway, that's just not, they're an incredibly coordinated breed. They have amazing balance. It's just to have an uncoordinated one, it's not really a thing. So but that said, in terms of you could have a dog with a fairly mild case of CA that can work because it is just a little bit uncoordinated. It might not be able to jump as high as the rest of your dogs, but there's nothing kind of wrong with its ability to learn or to do other components of working.
And long term for both of those forms, are they both fatal? You mentioned there that one that could live with a bit affected, but is one more fatal than the other?
Yeah, definitely. So the one that doesn't turn up until around 6 months old is progressive. So, and it progresses pretty quickly. I think the oldest dog I've heard of with that form was 3, and it was a pet dog and someone had it in a wheelchair thing. So it was really a tough round. So usually people would choose to euthanize them before about 18 months of age because, they are it doesn't seem, they don't seem unhappy. It doesn't seem to be painful. They seem blissfully oblivious, frankly. But, they just don't you just can't do anything with them. And then they get a bit upset if you take the other dogs out without them, of course.
Their quality of life gets very restrictive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So so that later onset form is generally it's one I really don't like sending out results saying that the dog is affected, because really what it means is the person is probably going to put that dog down.
Yeah.
Whereas the other form, the early onset, it's quite stable. So if you have a pup that's affected, but mildly affected at 12 weeks old, there's no reason to expect it to get worse. It could just be mildly affected for its entire working life and have a great working life. There's some sort of indications that they can get worse when they're like elderly, like kind of when they're 10 or 11, that they might go downhill pretty quick at that point. But it's not, I don't get to talk to like many owners that have those older dogs. Like I've only talked to a couple. So it's, I know that happens sometimes, but I don't know if it happens every time. So yes, with the early onset form, it's definitely a case of you have to just, you know, you can use your own judgment. Like if you think the dog's fine to go to a pet home or is still fine to work even, you know, and some of them, you know, are really like, it's such a minimal thing. Like you can have an elite dog and people think, oh, it's just part of them. The head shakes when they're really excited. And technically it's CA, but if it's such a mild effect, then yeah, there's nothing to worry about. And that dog will go on and have an entire lifetime of being functional, but having a shaky head when it's excited.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, yeah. So it's not at all a death sentence, kind of like the other one, whereas the other one is very close to being so. Yeah. So very different.
Oh, sorry. You mentioned they're affected a few times. Can you just talk through the classifications of like affected, carrier, clear, and how breeding particular classified dogs can work in the probability of that?
Okay. So
Please.
for both of the types of CA that we can test for, the genes are like recessive. So the dog has to inherit it from both the sire and the dam to be affected. And so an affected dog is a dog that, you know, is actually like either like is showing signs already, or if it's like a young dog and you're testing super young, you know, it's a dog that like might show signs in the future. The whereas dogs that only inherit like these genes from one parent are called carriers. They're completely healthy, like, or they said, well, they don't have CA, that's for sure, and they, you know, they have like they certainly you know they don't have CA, but they can pass that gene on to their pups. And if the dog that you mate them with also has that gene, then the pups can be affected. But that's for the pups that get that gene from both parents. So it's always like each parent has a 50-50 chance of passing it on for each pup. So you end up with just a proportion of the litter from two carriers usually being affected. So the odds are, you know, overall are 1 in 4, but it doesn't mean that like you will get exactly 1 in 4. It's like
all could be carriers or one. Is that what you're saying from that litter? Like it just like it's like, you know, how many times can you roll a 6 in a row?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, you know, I mean, exactly. I think if you did it with a partner and you're both flipping a coin and it was like the ones where you both flip a tail, like both flip tails at the same time are going to be affected. You know, it'll be some of them. You could have a whole bunch in a row, or you could get lucky and not have it happen. And similarly, so if you cross two carriers, some of the pups will actually be, you'll get basically from the pups, you'll get a mix of like completely clear ones. So ones that didn't get the gene from either parent, so they won't have CA and they can't have pups with CA. You'll get carrier pups, so they're healthy, but they could have affected pups. And then you can have, you know, the proportion that will be affected as well.
Yeah.
So that's, and the two types of CA that we can test for are independent. So technically a dog could have both, you know, so they can actually be a carrier for both, or have one and be a carrier for the other, or, you know, or just be a carrier for one. So it can get, you know, they don't interact. It's really like, you know, eye color.
So is what you're saying, you could have like, I guess, early onset, later onset. Like let's say the bitch is a carrier of one, a dog's a carrier of the other.
Yeah.
Pups can be carriers of both.
Yeah.
None will be affected.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that's like, you know, it might not feel like it. Excuse my shouty puppy in the back. She's like, let me just shut the door.
Do you think she's arguing what you're telling us?
Possibly. No, she's. I don't think she's smart enough. Bless her. Okay, so yes, if you crossed a dog, like one dog, so the dog is a carrier of early onset and the bitch is a carrier of late onset, yeah, you wouldn't have any pups with CA.
Yeah.
But it's quite, again, you could get some clear pups. You get some pups that are carriers for like early, some pups that are carriers just for late, and some pups that are carriers for both of them. But, from kind of, I don't know how many people would like listening to this breed like sheep or cattle and use EBVs. It's definitely one of those kind of more commercial genetics things to just to just be pragmatic and go, the point is not to like leave these animals out of the gene pool completely, but the point is to not lose animals because they're affected when you don't have to. So an animal being a carrier is a bit of a pain, but it's not the end of the world. Like you should take the whole like abilities into account, and just deal with that as a thing that restricts your breeding options, basically. Yeah.
And if you were to breed two affected pups, can you get everyone will either be affected or a carrier, correct?
No, if you bred two affected dogs together, all of the pups would be affected.
Affected. Okay, cool. And obviously, affected to clear, you're going to have ratios mixed up again.
No, actually, so that's an interesting one. If you have like an affected dog and you breed it to a clear dog, every single pup will be a carrier, but none of them will be affected. So all of them will get a copy of the mutant gene from the affected dog and a copy of the healthy gene from the clear dog. So they'll all be a carrier. Like, so as in, I guess, yeah, I probably should have said this way earlier, but we've got us and every mammal. You've got two copies of nearly every gene, one that you get from your mum and one that you get from your dad. So it's, it's like it's always one from each. It can't be two from one and none from the other. It is always one from each. So that's why your affected dog and your clear dog together will give you one affected gene, one clear gene, which is a carrier. Make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And do you have a question there, Laura?
That's all right.
I was going to say, when we were speaking earlier, you mentioned that this isn't something just found in Kelpies.
No, it's in certainly it's been found in working border collies as well. Both, particularly in the working border collies, the late onset one, which is the one with the worst consequences, the progressive one, has been found in working border collies, and you probably would have less people listening for this one specifically, but they're also present in coolies, like at lower frequencies than they are in like the more normal, like regular working dog populations. And also, I mean, present at a really low level in just show border collies as well.
Yeah. You were saying, though, before you'd done a fair bit of research with it in horses as well.
Oh, yeah, because, well, didn't actually like do the research, but yeah, horses can have CA as well. And it's classically like an Arabian disorder. So Arabian horses have three things that we test them for. And one of them is CA in horses. And it's got it's very analogous to CA in dogs. They're born, it usually shows up quite early. So usually weanling age, you usually start to see things. They start to be high stepping, and then they increasingly like lose control of their balance and coordination. And for horses, it wouldn't necessarily be lethal, but they become quite dangerous because they're so heavy. So you can't handle them because they can fall on you, basically. But yes, so it's typically an Arabian disorder, but I did have one client who has Welsh instead, who lost a foal to a weird degenerative, high-stepping thing. She thought perhaps it had had a fall and injured its neck. But a few months later or a year later, she saw a video of an Arabian foal with CA and thought, gosh, that looks exactly the same. And tested one of the parent, she'd put the foal down, but she still had the mare. So she tested the mare and it was a carrier for that Arabian CA. So yes, it can spread in, basically if I mean, sometimes it's like you don't even know that this disorder could be so old that it came into Arabians, like in the horse instance, came into Arabians and came into Welsh before they were, sort of separate, or when Welsh were being developed. Or it could happen more recently, like in the 1970s, when someone's thought, oh, I like my Welsh, but I'd like to have a bit more smooth gait, so Arabian, and bred that in, but unfortunately bred in the CA. And with working dogs, I think that, there's been enough mixing, basically, in the past generally, that there's been things go both ways. So if CA was a Kelpie thing, which it probably was, but I guess there's no way to even know that for sure. But, it's managed to go into the working border collies and the coolies as well. I don't know if that would be via Kelpie as well. But, there has been things that have come back from the border collie side into Kelpies. Like some Kelpies carry the gene for collie eye anomaly, which is like a minor, usually minor visual issue that is way more common in collies than it is in Kelpies. But, we do see it in Kelpies as well. So, things can, it's definitely, like things can definitely go from, through interbreeding from one breed into another. And it's really like thanks to really observant breeders that we pick these things up and go, hang on, these breeders should be checking for this problem too, because it has managed to spread to a new breed.
Yeah. And I'm assuming you also test for collie eye?
Yeah, collie. We do test for collie eye. It's in, like, when people choose to do a working dog test, we have the most common things people choose are this, what we call a working dog CA panel, which is just the two CA tests bundled together so you don't miss one. Or what we call the working dog core panel, which is a bigger set. So it's got the two types of CA, collie eye, ivermectin sensitivity, which is not that common, but it would be a pain if your dog was could be poisoned by ivermectin. And I think trapped neutrophil syndrome, which is more of a collie thing. I don't think I've seen that in a Kelpie yet. Yeah. It's an immune system issue. And degenerative myelopathy, which is an old age motor function thing as well. So we basically just went on the advice of some breeders about what the most common issues are.
Yeah. Ivermectin, that's a drench, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It's the active ingredient in worming, in at least quite a few drenches. Yeah. So somebody with eagle eyes spotted that their dogs were getting poisoned after they drenched the animals. I mean, because they would go and eat some of the poo, obviously. Yeah. So someone had to be eagle-eyed enough to notice that ran in a family, to figure out what was happening. Yeah. Ivermectin sense is pretty smart. Yeah. Okay, only dogs from this family, only some of them, if they eat the poo after we've drenched the animals, they get really sick. Apparently, they look like they're really drunk, they're really they OD on it, very easily. So, but yes, once again, it's just some eagle-eyed breeder who's seen the pattern and then brought it to a research group and gone, can you figure out what's happening with this? So so there's exactly. So there is, there's more than just CA when it comes to working Kelpies, but there's, that is the primary issue for working Kelpies. If you had to just pick a thing to focus on, I think the CA is most likely.
Yeah.
As a collective, with the samples you get, have you got some kind of an average as to how many dogs would be clear?
Oh, okay. The like what percentage?
Yeah, like if there was, say, a pool of 100 dogs, for example, like would we be at like, would the clear rate be really high or would it be fairly low?
Okay, so let me have a think. I'm trying to imagine a few sets of results recently. The and go, how often do I see it? Okay. In working kelpies, the early onset form is more common than the later onset form. And I would usually see out of every sort of, I test dogs just like in sets of 7, like, and there can be lots of sets of 7, but there's usually 1 or 2 positives per set of 7. So I guess you're looking at, 15 to 20%, I would say. And then the percentage for the later, like that are carriers for it, it's much rarer to see an affected dog that I guess that someone didn't know about. Like if it's not like, I don't know, when a vet sends me a single sample to test, it's nearly always affected. But, so yeah, whereas in the later onset, I would probably see, like I would think that it's maybe half that common, so closer to 10%. But I'd like to qualify that I could be overestimating it because I'm way more likely to send samples from people that know they have carrier than just a, like a whole. Yeah, they're not, like they tend to, like I'm biased towards seeing carriers because and I'm trying to kind of ignore things of when we test a whole litter for someone to see which pups are carriers because, 50% of them will be in that case.
Actually, that's a real good little disclaimer to add because most people will be sending them because they're already suspicious there is an issue, right? Like that's actually a really good thing to point out.
Well, if you know both parents are clear, you know that your pups are clear, so you don't have to send samples.
Correct.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So it does end up biased. But I suppose let's think when people send in like their whole like
team.
Instead of team, their whole team, which I know can be very variable in size, but I think there's only been in the time that we've done it, like for people that have like send us more than 7 dogs at once, we've literally had like maybe 4 owners where all the dogs were clear. It is really rare for me to be able to send results out to someone and say all your dogs are clear and none of them are carriers. That is uncommon, and some people I think must somehow have an eye for it because like they've got way more carriers than they should and they've got them from different places and they're thinking like, how could you pick it? Like, how did you end up with so many carriers? There must be something about them that they like. I don't know, because it is a motor function gene. I don't know whether it does affect their actual working ability. Like when they're just a carrier, maybe they are a little bit faster, or maybe they learn a bit better. Because it's a brain thing. Trainability is a big issue as well. So I don't know if there's something about these dogs, that people actually can pick because it is in the way that they respond.
Yeah, it's a different trait somewhere.
Yeah, something really subtle that you couldn't necessarily even put your finger on, but you're just like, I just like that dog a bit more.
Yeah. Would you say the percentages are the same with the Border Collies?
No. So with the Border Collies, the Border Collies hardly ever have the early onset one, which is the more harmless one. That's quite rare in them. That'd be like a couple of percent, 2 or 3% maybe. They have more of the late onset, the nasty ones, than the working kelpies do. But I think it's possible that that's because, I think I'm getting a very biased set of dogs. So people have kind of, it's like, I mean, in both breeds, I mean, this is a wild generalization.
Yeah.
But elite dogs are more likely to be carriers. Like, it does unfortunately seem to have been accidentally bred into like a lot of the elite lines. So, So sometimes, people just seem to be, testing their best dogs because, unfortunately, a lot of them have a lot in common with one another,
Yeah.
They kind of, once they find out that, someone else's dogs are carriers and they're closely related, they'll get theirs done too. And, grown up, some will be carriers.
Especially when people are line breeding as closely as a lot of us do at times. I guess you need to be careful that you're not putting two carriers together.
Yes, exactly. I think that's where you see the negative consequences of line breeding, which, because it's like it greatly increases your chance of accidentally breeding carriers together because, if they're closely related and one's a carrier, the other one is much more likely than just a random dog to also be a carrier.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask a silly question again because I'm trying to understand it. But if you breed clear and a carrier, they could be carriers, but they won't be affected.
Yeah.
Okay. That was my question because so that Welsh pony you were talking about,
it must have been bred to a carrier stallion.
Yeah.
As well. So it was a carrier and it must have been bred to a carrier stallion to have that affected foal, which is incredibly unlucky for that breeder because I'm sure CA is very rare in Welsh. But, maybe they were line breeding. I don't know. You know, so it's exactly. It's super unlucky.
Yeah.
So exactly. So I guess the takeaways are if you've got a clear dog, if you're lucky enough to have your best dog be clear, no matter what you cross them with, you will not have an affected pup.
Yeah.
That's the win on a completely clear dog. And that's what I guess what people look for when their best dog is a carrier is like, can they find some clear dogs to mate it with so that they know that they can still use their best dog, but they'll lose no pups to CA.
Yeah.
And you've talked about samples today. Like the people out there that don't know the process, like how do you collect the sample?
Oh, okay. All right. It's not too bad. Like
It's very easy. Like we've got a relationship because we test our own dogs, and I couldn't believe how simple it was.
Okay. Yeah, it's not very high tech. We've tried to make it like, something that you can do even if you're super remote. So basically with dogs, like so horses, and I'm sure if people have cattle, they would know that generally that's like DNA testing is done from hair roots. But with dogs, because they have such fine hair, like we can test from dog hair, but it's not the best. Mouth swabs work best for adult dogs. So what you do is we can use like a standard cotton bud, cotton swab, the kind you clean your ears with or clean up makeup. And the aim is to rub that round inside your dog's mouth to pick up as many loose skin cells as possible so they stick to the cotton bud. It's just take your time, like 30 seconds per dog. Try to cover as much skin as possible. So it's the inner cheeks, like the sticky inner cheeks and the gums, but the tongue doesn't really have anything to offer, so don't bother trying to get it on their tongue. And, you just basically sort of teeth brushing firmness and take your time and cover a lot of skin. And we do both ends of a cotton swab, and then we want you to put it in a paper envelope. It's really important that the sample dries out and doesn't come to us wet. If it's wet, it'll just go moldy and there'll be no DNA left. So cotton swab, sticky, disgusting, from dog's mouth, into a paper envelope. You can seal the envelope up straight away. The paper will help draw the moisture out of the swab as well. And then if you've got a whole bunch of dogs in your team, you can just basically write on the outside of the envelope which dog it was, stack them all up, put them in a bigger envelope and post it off to us. And they last a really long time. So we keep them in the archives for 5 years. I know they still usually work after 3, as long as they're kept dry and in the dark. So the paper envelopes are important because they help dry out the sample and they also protect it from light. So that's what we're after. If you're an incredibly organized person and you have a litter of puppies and they're not all the same color, we can test from umbilical cord as well. So if you're on the spot when your new litter comes out and you know that you want to test some because, for instance, you want to keep a clear pup from the litter, you can collect a little bit of umbilical cord, still sticky, basically. Wipe it onto the envelope again. And just the challenge with that really is just making sure that you can identify which puppy each bit of cord belongs to. So if they all have the same color and markings, it's very tough unless you've got collars on them that stay on for long enough. But, if you're lucky that you've got different sex and color combinations, so you've got like red and tan bitch, red and tan male, small black and tan male with a white chest, and you can just tell them apart like that. You can certainly just put in enough of a description that you know which of your pups is which. Umbilical cord, we like as a sample because it's got heaps of DNA, doesn't hurt the pup to collect it all. And, we can get the results out to you, so that you have heaps of time to make a decision about which pups you might want to keep and which ones you might want to sell. So, that's a good option too. So yes, mouth swabs for the adult dogs because their umbilical cord is long gone. Umbilical cords if you're planning ahead and, you want to test the litter. Apart from that, the main things to think about when you take a sample is that we want to test, it's going to be most useful for you if we test your dog and not your dog's dinner and not your dog's best friend. So you need to pick a time when their mouth is going to be pretty much just them. So it's fine if that's after they've been asleep. It's fine if that's after they've been for a big run, if they haven't been stopping to pick stuff up and eat it. You will know your dog's best about when in your routine will work to collect a sample. I know sometimes people tie them all out and make them wait for an hour and then they just go and do the whole team. But you can equally just use your own regular timetable to pick a time when their mouths are relatively clean. But yeah, definitely don't do it after you've just fed them. You'll be,
You can tell what they've eaten there.
Well, I'll be able to tell you that I ate something that didn't have CA.
Yeah. And you turn on, this is one thing I was very surprised about, your turnaround time is very quick.
Yeah, once we get the samples, we do our best. Once we get the samples, the turnaround time is usually within a week. You'll get the results back. So they just get emailed out to you. Or people can opt to get a text as well if you're just hanging out for them, So the main things that speed it up are honestly express posting us the samples instead of using regular post.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's we try to be quick, but that said, because we do a lot of horses, when it hits peak horse breeding season in late October and November, we can be really busy and times do blow out a bit right around then. But apart from that, it's it's usually pretty quick.
Actually, can I just give you a bit of feedback? So obviously I speak to a stack of people in the dog world, working dog world, other disciplines as well. Just recently, feedback on yourself and your own business. People are wrapped with that you answer the phone yourself, and your customer service. People are absolutely really wrapped with that. I think that it's just warming to know that they're actually speaking to someone that is hands-on with it and not someone that's 3 times separated but heard it off somebody else as well.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I do. Yeah, I do try to, exactly. I do try to answer people's questions. When people either call to find out about how to test or find out more about, questions like Laura's about, I've got to carry a dog. What will happen if I cross it with this other dog? Will there be consequences? And yeah, because the whole point is that it should help you get more healthy dogs. I wouldn't want to do it if it wasn't actually helping you. There wouldn't be really much point. So, the aim is really that to save you some heartache and, and hopefully it's just one of those things that you can just kind of take into account when you make your breeding decisions. Just oh yeah, that's right, that dog's a carrier, so we got to, rule out those options. But, in some ways, when it comes to breeding decisions, it almost makes it easier to have some options ruled out for you.
Yeah.
Actually, that said, are you seeing an increase in the volume of tests come through?
For working dogs? Yeah. I think it's steadily, just
I was going to say there's a lot of talk in a lot of industries now within the dogs of testing and breeding responsibly from that testing. So it's good to see that people are, or from your end, that you're seeing an increase in dogs being tested.
Yeah. Yeah, like there's always new people, and I suppose actually the pleasant thing that I see, I guess, is people choosing to test their breeding dogs not because they had an affected dog. So at the start, it was often because they had a sick dog, and then they'd find out that it was CA that the dog had, and then they would be like, okay, better test all my other dogs. But now it is far more people just coming
Before
like
they
without
start.
an issue, exactly, without an issue, just to either because they're hoping to be able to boast that all their dogs are clear, I don't know, or just to make sure that there's not an issue, just so that they're kind of across it and they can. But I mean, some of it is just commercial. Like if people are coming to you and going, "Can I use your dog?" Like you want, but then they keep on going, "Well, do you know if he's like a CA carrier?" Like it's just easier to be able to go, "No, we've checked and he's clear."
Yeah.
You can definitely, yeah.
What about costing? That's
Well,
always everyone's first question is, how much is it going to cost me? Am I able to ask that question? Or
of course. It's kind of critical, isn't it? If it was like 10 grand a dog, probably not a great idea. No. Okay, it's like for doing the CA panel, which is just like the early and later onset CA that we can test for. It's $66 including GST, like on a per dog basis. It goes down a little bit if you test 7 or more dogs at once. There's just an automatic discount. You don't need to get a discount code or anything. It's just when you put the order in, if you put it in and say, I'm testing 10 dogs, there'll be an automatic discount applied.
Yeah.
And that's so that's how much it is for the CA testing. If you decide, particularly if you've got like working border collies, for whom the working dog core panel with the collie eye and the TNS and stuff as well might be an even better idea. I think it's $94 including GST. So, and again, it will come down a bit if you're testing like more dogs at once. So that's the pricing. It should hopefully be at a point where, basically, given how valuable working dogs can be, if you get one more that you can sell that you didn't lose to CA, then you've more than paid for all of your
well and truly. Yeah. What if, say, I purchased a dog from, let's say, Daniel, for example. I purchased a dog from Daniel. He's told me it's been tested but can't remember what the results were, or it is clear but can't remember, like, we did the full program, like with the collie eye and everything. Can I come to you and say, this is my dog's name, I purchased it from Daniel, do you have the results? Or is that part of your sort of disclosure that you don't do that?
No, so we do, like, the results go with the dog.
Yeah.
So while the person who did the testing in the first place can also always access them, I think it's far fairer to have the results go with the dog, just the way you want your vet records to go with the dog. If you sell it to someone else. Like, so it's what we do need though is some proof that you're now the owner of the dog. So like a photo of the receipt, or it listed under your name in a registry, or a message from the previous owner saying, like Dan saying, an email to me saying, Laura's now the owner of these dogs. Can you please give her a copy of all the results? Yeah. But also, if Dan had lost his results, he could just email me and say, can I please have another copy? Yeah. We keep them forever. So it's just easy for us to like reprint them, like as in send you the PDF again and go, here's your results.
Yeah.
Like,
so pretty much there's no excuse. If someone's had their dog tested, there's no excuse that they can't show you the results.
No, it's really sus if they say they've had it tested and they won't show you the results. That's very sus. Yeah. It is, unfortunately, it's one of those things you hear all the time of like, oh, but they said the dog was clear. I mean, I hear it in the horse industry too as well. They said the stallion was clear. It's like, well,
wasn't
a really good idea to see a copy of those results, rather than just assuming that they're right. And I've also, like, I've seen dodgy stuff where people will like send a screenshot of the results, but just with that important one that's positive, cropped off the bottom. So do be suspicious if people aren't giving you coffee. Be suspicious. Yeah, it's unfortunately if it's someone you know really well and you trust, great. But if it's not someone that you know well, just make sure to see a copy of those results.
When are you going to take up parentage testing? I'd love you to take up parentage testing.
Well, as soon as I get on my little staff whip to learn. So the parentage testing actually, so parentage testing requires a sort of it requires different equipment and a slightly different workflow to what this color and disorder testing does. So it is something that I know we should do, and we tried to just sort of send just the parent do get the DNA, but then send it off to another lab that could do dog parentage testing. But the failure rate was just so high that we've just gone, no, we're not going to do it until we can do it ourselves. We've got control. So dog parentage would be great, because then you can do things like mix sire litters and figure out which pups came from which dog, or if you get a surprise litter, you can figure out who the dad is. Yes, it would be good. It's definitely on the books, but I can't. I'm sorry, Dan. I can't give you a date. I don't know.
No, that's guys. It's obviously there is someone else that does that. It's just a bit of a pain when you got to do two, and I'd love to just send everything your way to do that. But hey, when that's there, let me know, and that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, it will be good. But exactly. You don't Laura mentioned line breeding, and this is totally off the CA topic as well. But from a geneticist perspective, I'm kind of guys, if it wouldn't be okay for your sister, it's not really okay for your dogs.
Yeah.
There's not line breeding has this one thing that it can do, which is reduce variation and give you a more consistent outcome. But that's its only strength. So, it has a lot of negatives as well. So it reduces fertility, it makes CA and everything else much more likely in the pups, because it's not, the same thing applies to all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff that's out there. So, I know people have made amazing dogs using line breeding, but it's not something that I'd recommend really, except in very, very specific circumstances.
How about how far back would you go with that though?
Oh, okay. That's a very concrete question. Okay. When I was a baby nerd and doing my job, I tried to actually find a concrete answer to that question, what is okay. And the answer was quite complicated, but roughly speaking, that as long as you're selecting out the crappy animals and not breeding from them, inbreeding at about 1% per generation is acceptable, or is kind of the maximum. The maximum should be 1% per generation. And I'm pretty sure that I figured out, if you go back, you kind of want you hit 1%. You hit a bit over 1% when you have a common ancestor who's a grandsire on one side and a great-grandsire on the other side. So, but it's around that. So if you've got a common ancestor who's a great-grandsire, I'm pretty sure, I hope I'm not wrong about this, someone's going to email me and go, but roughly speaking, when you get to the point where the common ancestor is 3 generations back, a great-grandsire or a great-granddam, you're really at that point where there's not a lot of inbreeding happening or anything like that. That's below that threshold, which I actually found in a World Health Organization publication that was intended to help people keep breeds healthy in second and third world countries as well. Sort of saying, don't inbreed your mountain cattle or special dog that you use in Tibet. It was for that kind of thing. But I still think because it's been very hard to find an actual rule of thumb for that. So yeah, it's certainly further back than most of you would probably like to hear. Yeah. Anyway, but yes. So but it's yeah, as long as you're selecting really hard for the good dogs and not breeding from ones with like conformational issues or temperament issues or fertility issues, then hopefully it will all stay under control and you keep the breed really good.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the important thing, right?
Yeah.
Keeping what's right by the breed and the dogs.
Yeah, exactly. You want to leave it kind of in better shape than you found it, not worse. Yeah.
There was a question come through, and it was talking about the late and early onset, because you mentioned roughly about 6 months is the time for the late onset, and the early was about 8 weeks you'd normally start seeing. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So they've asked, why is it at those age brackets and not at any time in their life for the late onset?
Oh, I'll be honest, I don't know. And the research that was done into these types was not extensive enough to actually figure out like the biological mechanism that's underlying them. I think it's so unfortunately, I don't know. For instance, I think it's super interesting that like the early onset one stabilizes. So they're born, they look fine, they get worse, they get wobbly, like a bit wobbly, but then it stabilizes and doesn't get any worse.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Like, I don't know. That's
and that is a perfectly fine answer. Like until we all know more, there's not much else we can say, is there?
No, unfortunately, it's not known that even that gene in other animal species hasn't been linked to anything. Like it's not really known exactly what that gene we know like there's a mutation in that gene that's linked to C8 in kelpies, but sometimes you could find like that there's people that have a mutation in that gene and it causes something like similar in people, but I'm pretty sure with that particular gene there's nothing like in another animal or in people that's analogous that you can learn like to kind of extrapolate from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Ko, thank you very much for your time today. If there was one closing thing that you as a geneticist you would put out into the working dog community, what would it be?
Oh, look, honestly, I think it's mostly just to that if you do use genetic testing, don't get too worried about a result that says your dogs aren't completely clear. If it was a champion the day before you tested, it is still a champion when you get the results. Like it's not something I really get worried when I see people overreact to like a result that I guess technically is negative, if the dog's a carrier, because it's so manageable. It's so much better than them having a terrible temperament. Like it's so much easier to deal with. It's just a minor thing, so it's just something to take into account. Just like, the dog having a thing for chasing birds. It's just a thing that you take into account, and it definitely can help you, avoid losing a pup that you didn't have to lose. And I know for the people that have had to put down dogs that they're halfway through training, and they know that they just don't want that, to happen again. So it's great to avoid, but yes, don't freak out if you're getting positives in your dogs. They're still exactly the same dog they were the day before you got those results.
Beautiful. I think that's great advice.
That's an awesome message. Thank you very much for your time tonight. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone listening live and listening back. And please remember, we learn every day. And the day we stop learning will be a sad one for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Cheers.